Howdy folks, and welcome to another episode of Mingles with Jingles. As always, advert-free, supported by everybody who supports me on Patreon. Once again, thank you very much. So, I heard some news very recently that got me tremendously excited. I don't know how this news has managed to slip under my radar for so long, but starting this week on Saturday the 26th of July, one of my all-time favourite comic strips is getting a TV show starring Carl Urban on Amazon Prime. It's called The Boys, and it's a very realistic look at what the world would be like if superheroes were real. You see, it's written by the Northern Irish comics creator Garth Ennis, who's about the same age as me, and like me, grew up in the UK reading war comics in the 1970s. Unlike me, Garth Ennis didn't read superhero comics until he was a teenager, at which point he just found them silly, unrealistic, and unbelievable. So, The Boys is a comic book about superheroes written by somebody who doesn't like superhero comics. Now, The Boys was by no means the first comic strip that treated the whole subject of superheroes and superpowers in a semi-realistic fashion. You could argue that Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons' The Watchmen did it first in the mid-80s. And then, of course, you've got other writers like Warren Ellis, whose The Authority series deals with superheroes who deal with problems that actually matter. They don't stop bank robbers, they stop corrupt governments. But Garth Ennis has always had a knack for writing realistic characters in unrealistic situations who deal with things realistically. And The Boys addresses the whole subject of what would superheroes actually be like if they were real. Just think about it. If you were Superman, if you were invulnerable, if you could fly, if you had superpowers, super strength, super hearing, if you could shoot lasers out of your eyes, if you could do anything that you wanted without fear of consequences, because who's going to stop you? Would you really be flying around stopping bank robbers? Or would you be doing whatever you wanted, because who's going to stop you? Funnily enough, I very recently watched an excellent movie that kind of deals with the same issues. It's called Brightburn. I don't know if you've seen it. If you haven't, I highly recommend it. And it kind of deals with the issue of what if Superman, when he was growing up, didn't have the stabilising influence of Jonathan and Martha Kent to teach him what was right and what was wrong? How would Superman have turned out? The movie's a horror, by the way, so you can probably guess that he didn't turn out very well. But that's kind of the same thing. And the thing about The Boys that fascinated me and really hooked me in was the very realistic way it treats the whole subject. If superpowers and superheroes were real, how would it all work? And not just the way superpowers would work, although it addresses that as well. In fact, if you watch the trailer, you'll see the consequences of what happens if somebody who's travelling at super speed runs into somebody who's not a superhuman. But how would it work socially and politically? Because the police tend to take a very dim view of people that run around taking the law into their own hands. But if you're dealing with superhumans, how exactly are you going to stop them if they decide that's what they want to do? And why would they decide that's what they want to do? Because how do you make a living out of that? And here we get to the crux of the matter. How do you monetize superpowers? Because we live in a world where TV is flooded with talent shows, with people wanting to get rich and famous, and reality TV shows of people wanting to get rich and famous. And if the thing that you have to sell is a superpower, somebody's going to want to sponsor that. Somebody's going to want you to be drinking their soft drink and wearing their running shoes. Somebody's going to be wanting to design your costume. And so various different extremely rich and powerful corporations have their own stables of superheroes, their own superhero teams, with their own lifestyles of the rich and famous TV show tie-ins and America's Next Superhero TV shows, and so on and so on and so on. And so these people who, let's not forget, their only qualification is that they have a superpower. They're not motivated by a sense of duty, loyalty, or patriotism or any of that. They're motivated by greed, because they've got a marketable ability. And some of the richest corporations in the world are lining up to throw money at them to have them in their superhero teams. So superheroes are real, they are out there, they have real superpowers. They all form into superhero teams. sponsored by various different corporations that make billions out of glamorizing, popularizing and promoting superheroes. But what do the superheroes actually do? Because there are no supervillains for them to fight. What, you mean there are no bad people with superpowers? There are no evil people with superpowers? Oh no, there are lots of bad and evil people with superpowers, but they're all in the superhero teams because the money is so good. I mean, think about it. If you're on the front cover of every gossip and celebrity magazine, if you're making millions upon millions every year, if your exploits and who you're dating is the topic of discussion for billions of people, why would you throw all that away just to rob a bank? I mean, you're far better off playing the game and enjoying the fruits of corporate superhero sponsorship. And even if you didn't start off bad, what would that kind of lifestyle do to you? What kind of person would you become? Living on a constant diet of fame, media attention, sex, drugs, and alcohol. What kind of person would you become? And if there are no supervillains for the superhero teams to fight, what do they do? Well, they basically make it up. Well, that would never work. Are you sure about that? People watch wrestling, don't they? Wrestling is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and that's all made up. They do the same thing with superheroes. So you've got this massive global industry built up to monetize, popularize, and exploit the popularity of superheroes. And yet at the same time, a lot of these superheroes are not particularly nice people. Maybe not all of them started off that way, but if your lifestyle consists of a constant diet of sex, drugs, and alcohol, with the occasional public appearance where you have to be on your best behavior, you're probably not going to end up being the most well-balanced person out there. So there is a potential problem here, and you can understand why the government might be nervous, because you've got these essentially spoilt brats at best and downright evil people at worst with superpowers. How do you prevent the whole situation from getting out of control? Well, it's kind of self-policing, because these mega corporations that sponsor these superhero teams, they obviously have a vested interest in protecting their brand. And the superheroes enjoying this corporate sponsorship don't want to rock the boat, because then their contract gets terminated, or they get demoted from one of the more prestigious superhero teams down to one of the less prestigious superhero teams, and the sponsorships dry up and so on and so on. So the corporations basically keep their own house clean, and the government doesn't have to step in. Or at least that's the theory. But of course we don't live in a perfect world, and some of these so-called superheroes are extremely bad people. And even the ones that aren't, well, if you're living on a lifestyle fueled by sex, drugs, and prostitutes, and you commit an indiscretion, it's a superpowered indiscretion, and those consequences can be quite messy. Now, of course, their corporate sponsors are very, very good at making sure that these superpowered indiscretions never see the light of day and never get any media attention, but that doesn't mean they're not happening. And we wouldn't want people to get used to thinking that they can get away with it. And that's where the boys come in. So when there's a superhero who's been a bit of a naughty boy or girl, and they're in serious need of a good slap, you send the boys around. The boys are a strictly off-the-books CIA team whose basic function is to maintain surveillance on the superhero community, and when any of them step out of line, the boys go in to give them a good slap. The reason the team has to be off the books is because the President of the USA is under a lot of pressure. President Bob Schaefer doesn't trust superheroes. Unfortunately, there are a lot of very powerful special interest groups trying to get legislation pushed through Congress to allow superheroes to actually take part in anti-terrorist and police operations, something that the President is dead set against. However, these special interest groups have managed to get their nominee as his Vice President, and they would love nothing more than to engineer a situation where the Vice President has to take over. It is in fact rumoured that some of these special interest groups have even managed to infiltrate the Secret Service with their own agents. So the President, while he would love nothing more than to clamp down on superhero activities, he has to be careful. And that's why the boys are a completely off-the-books, black-budget CIA operation for maximum deniability. The problem with the boys is that originally they were doing a lot more surveillance and a lot less of the slapping. But their leader, Billy Butcher, he really doesn't like superheroes. I mean, it turns out he's got very good reason to not like superheroes, one in particular, but I don't want to give away any spoilers. And with Butcher in charge of the boys, he tends to, how can I put this, engineer circumstances so that they tend to escalate rather than de-escalate, purely so he can give these superheroes the slapping he thinks they all richly deserve. Well, anyway, I'm starting to stray dangerously into spoiler territory here, and I wouldn't want to ruin it for anybody who hasn't read all 72 issues of the original comic strip. Garth Ennis is probably best known for the work he did with the late great artist Kevin Dillon on Preacher, which also has an Amazon TV show. But he did more episodes of The Boys than he did Preacher. Anyway, if you like the sound of this, it's out as a TV show starring Carl Urban as Billy Butcher this Saturday, the 26th of July. I hope it's good. I really do, because I absolutely loved the comic strip. It's one of the most refreshing, well-written and realistic things I've ever read. I do have high hopes for it because it is a Carl Urban project, and he did such a good job on Dread. He's got a track record of getting and respecting the source material, and also the writer Garth Ennis and the artist Derek Robertson are also on as co-producers, so fingers crossed. It's got every chance of being one of the best things that you're going to see on TV this year. Well, let's hope it is. And just in case you're not quite yet convinced and you haven't seen the trailer yet, there's a link down below to it in the video description. Actually, it just occurred to me, you probably won't believe this, it's an amazing coincidence, but Garth Ennis, the comics writer, as well as The Boys, as well as Preacher, he's also quite famous for writing a series of World War II based comics called Garth Ennis's War Stories. And he's done a World of Tanks collaboration. I'm not joking. The World of Tanks has its own comic series, and they're written by Garth Ennis. And in fact, some of them were illustrated by the late great co-creator of Judge Dredd, the Spanish comics artist Carlos Ezquerra. I highly recommend them, by the way. They are also fantastically good. Anyway, what else is new? Well, I don't know if anybody saw the video, or the bonus video that I pushed out on Saturday. Akazuki is now 6 months old. She was 6 months old on Saturday. We got her when she was 12 weeks, or 3 months old. In the space of 3 months, she has tripled in size. I mean, I understood that Maine Coon cats get big. Males in particular. The females tend to be, I mean, they're still big, but they're not as big as the males can get. The males, once they're a couple of years old, they average at about 21 pounds. They're big cats, but Akazuki, she's 3 times the size she was when we got her. And she's still probably got a year and a half of growing in her, and then probably spend another year filling out and just bulking up before she's a fully adult Maine Coon cat. She's just so adorable. She's devoted to me, by the way. I mean, she gets very upset if she can't see me. She follows me around the house everywhere I go. Her favourite place in the whole house is basically wherever I happen to be at the time. And when I'm sitting at the computer desk, her favourite place is on the computer desk, on the mouse mat, curled around my mouse hand with her head resting on top of my mouse hand, where she will go to sleep for hours if you let her. And I'm sure you can imagine just how difficult that makes it when you're trying to play a computer game or do anything on the computer that requires the use of a mouse. So, you know, most things that you do on the computer. She's there right now. In fact, earlier today I was on TC Free's World Warships live stream, and I had to stop playing because Akazuki woke up, realised, oh, you're on the computer, and came over and basically slept on top of my mouse hand. So I had to stop playing. It was either that or move her, and I'm not going to move her. I mean, come on, I'm not a monster. And the weird thing is, I never used to like cats. I was always a dog person. I was always like, cats suck, dogs are great. And dogs are great. I mean, Boo's a fantastic little dog, and I'll fight you if you say different. I always used to say that people who own cats were just mugs. Absolute suckers. I mean, seriously, get yourself a dog. You get something out of a relationship with a dog. The dog repays you with love and undivided loyalty, and you can train a dog to do things. When was the last time you saw a cat fetching a stick? You try throwing a stick for a cat. Right? Unless there's a tin of tuna attached to the end of the stick, the cat isn't going anywhere. The cat's like, oh, you threw your stick away. Well, I'm going to have a nap. I'll wake up when I'm hungry, see that dinner's ready. You know? It's like they say, dogs have owners, cats have staff. And it's true. It's absolutely 100% true. And you can point this out to cat owners, and they won't argue with you. They don't care. They understand that cats are taking over the world one human at a time. So I just always thought that cat owners were suckers, but particularly because you never really see cats making great displays of affection, the way dogs do. But they do show affection. The thing is, they each do it in their own individual way. And you have to be a cat owner to see it. Now, maybe they're, or, well, since I count myself in their ranks now, maybe we are deluding ourselves. But I do see it, because this little cat gets absolutely distraught whenever she doesn't know where I am. And it has been kind of hard on one of our other cats, Juicy, because there was me and Rita had her two cats, Juicy and Crystalline. And Crystalline was Rita's first cat, so Rita was Crystalline's human. Cats do that. They pick a human, and you're their human, and you always will be. Now that meant that it was great news when Rita moved in for Juicy, because Juicy basically imprinted on me. She had her own human for the first time, and she was so affectionate. Rita was so happy that Juicy, and I was happy too, of course, but Juicy finally had her own human. Rita was constantly telling me I've never seen her do that with anybody. Little things that she would do that she never did with Rita, because Rita was Crystalline's human. Ju never had a human of her own. Well, then Akazuki came along, and things were quite difficult for Juicy for a while, because Akazuki obviously imprinted on me as well. And poor Juicy, I could tell that she wasn't happy. There were little things that she used to do that she just didn't do anymore. She was kind of standoffish. She spent more time alone and by herself rather than, you know, with me or Rita. And it was kind of heartbreaking, but what are you going to do? I've got this 3-month-old kitten that I have to look after, and obviously the kitten's going to imprint on me. Well, finally, it took a while, but I'm seeing Juicy being more like her old self. Instead of spending most of the day alone, she's quite happy to share the room with me and Akazuki while I'm busy working on the computer, and she'll just sit there in the beanbag behind me and have a good purr to herself. I go to bed at night, and she's climbing onto the bed and laying down next to me and having a good purr, something that she used to do every night, but for a good 2 months she just stopped doing once the new kitten arrived, but she's doing that again. So I have had a stressful couple of months worrying about her, but she seems to be okay, and that's a big relief to me, let me tell you, because it must have been difficult for her, because I was her human, and then this new kitten comes. I mean, first of all, a new cat coming in the house is going to be stressful enough for the other two cats, but then for that cat to take your position and take your human away, she must have been really unhappy, and I'm really pleased that she seems to be coming around. All of these social dynamics, of course, went right over Boo's head. He's like, what? What's that? Social dynamics? Are we going for a walk yet? Hey, food bowl's empty. Sort it out. Oh, you just got back. I really missed you. You know, he doesn't give a shit. He's a dog. That's what I love about dogs. They're so simple. You really do know where you stand with dogs. But cats are great too. Something that I have come to understand over the last couple of years, both with Rita's cats and, you know, with, well, technically, Juicy's mine now as well. Rita gave her to me, since Juicy had basically adopted me anyway. But now I've got two of my own, and they're fantastic as well. Well, anyway, we're going to finish this week's episode of Mingles with Jingles with a story about the world's luckiest, or possibly unluckiest man, depending on your point of view. This is the story of a Croatian music teacher called Frane Selak, and on a cold January day in 1962, he was taking a train journey between Sarajevo and Dubrovnik, but the train jumped the tracks and plunged into an icy river, killing 17 passengers. He managed to swim back to shore, suffering hypothermia, shock, bruises and a broken arm, but understandably very happy to be alive. 1 year later, he's on a plane travelling from Zagreb to Rijeka when a door blew off the plane and he was sucked right out of the aircraft. A few minutes later, the plane crashed, killing 19 passengers. But he woke up in hospital. He'd been found in a haystack with only minor injuries. In 1966, he was riding on a bus that went off the road and into a river. 4 people were killed, but not him. He suffered only cuts and bruises. In 1970, he was driving along when his car suddenly caught fire. He managed to stop and get out just before the fuel tank exploded and engulfed the entire car in flames. In 1973, a faulty fuel pump sprayed fuel all over the engine of another one of his cars while he was driving it, blowing flames out through the air vents. His only injury? He lost most of his hair. His friends started calling him lucky. In 1995, he was hit by a city bus in Zagreb, but received only minor injuries. In 1996, he was driving on a mountain road when he turned a corner and saw a truck coming straight at him. He drove the car through a guardrail, jumped out, landed in a tree, and watched his car explode 300 feet below him. By this time he was starting to get a bit of a reputation, presumably not just for being the world's luckiest man, but also the guy that you definitely didn't want to have sitting next to you in any form of public transport. And then, in June 2003, at the age of 74, he bought his first lottery ticket in 40 years, and won more than $1 million. He said, "I'm going to enjoy my life now. I feel like I've been reborn. I know God was watching over me all these years." He told reporters that he planned to buy a house, a car and a speedboat and to marry his girlfriend. He'd been married 4 times before and reflected, "My marriages were disasters too." 1 year later, in 2004, he was hired to star in an Australian TV commercial for Doritos. At first he accepted the job, but then he changed his mind and refused to fly to Sydney for the filming. Reason? He said he didn't want to push his luck. You can teach an old dog new tricks after all. And that's it for this week's episode of Mingles with Jingles. I hope you've enjoyed it, and as always, take care, and I'll catch you next time.
Your son's munitions factory is out of action and they lost a big stockpile of ordnance. Throw in the fact that the settlement's